What it do? This is the Brothers on Books podcast, where we find great books that will give you real value and actionable steps and have fun in the process. Please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you'd like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. A great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to this would be greatly appreciated. If you can think of any friend, family member, or coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along. For the original episodes, the OGs, please visit brothersonbooks.com. I am Jack Allweil, and with me, as always, is Alex Allweil. Al, how you doing today?
Doing great, Jack. How are you?
Great. And who do we have with us, Al?
We have returning, I think, for the third time.
No, second.
Third time, Godmother Sharon.
Oh.
You're forgetting the bookseller of Cabal, which you did with us.
Oh.
Or the pirate book.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Okay, you were right, Alex, like you always are. Okay.
Except for the times when I'm not right, which are few and far between. So, Jack, what book are we doing?
We are discussing Tim Marshall's The Power of Geography. And this was, I don't think you really needed to read the other books in this series, but it says it's kind of the fourth book in this series. But I had read one of them, Prisoners of Geography, which I really liked, and that's how I picked this book.
Yeah,
with the other two, I didn't know that they had two. He had two others. Not that I'm going to read it. But.
Yeah, I think they were like something with like flags, kind of like using flags as the backdrop, and then he discussed history.
Okay.
But I haven't read those, so
okay.
Yeah, I mean, you could definitely read this. You could definitely read this independently. Mm-hmm. On his Wikipedia, it's listed as in the series Prisoners Geography, Worth Dying For, The Power and Politics of Flags, Divided, Why We're Living in an Age of Walls, and then this book, The Power of Geography. But yeah, this is definitely standalone, I would say.
So, Sharon, what were your initial thoughts?
I really liked the book. I thought that I learned so much from it, and it made me think about things that I really hadn't thought of. So I was glad that we chose this book.
That seems to be a deviation from the past books we've chosen with you, Sharon. It's good to hear, and not to mention that you canceled on me on a couple. So I'm glad to hear that we finally got some.
And I'll get back to you on that because you picked the wrong kind of books. But anyways.
Yeah, what did you think?
Yeah, I also really liked it. I guess my like main, I don't know, one of the things that sort of kept coming back to me was other than, it was incredibly informational or educational. I feel like the amount of research he has to do for these in some very, just over both like time, like into history and then over the areas. I have to imagine when he's talking about some of these very sort of isolated places in Africa, it's probably not the easiest to get historical information on those. So it's really I think a testament to his research abilities.
Well, he's got a really long bibliography here.
Right. Yeah. It's not easy to read through all of that and then sort of combine everything into a coherent article.
Mm-hmm.
One of the main things that stood out to me as he was going through, at least definitely the back half of the book, was having a strong cultural identity in countries, making things that would sort of make things run smoother. I would say for the country as a whole.
I'm sorry, make what? I didn't hear the last part of it.
As the country, to make the country run smoother, like everyone be more, I guess, harmonious going forward. So Jack, what about you?
Well, so he wrote it similar to Prisoners of Geography in the sense like each chapter is kind of standalone, so you could bounce around. So I like that. So I could kind of like turn my brain off a little bit after each chapter. I thought Okay, so a couple of my takeaways. It seemed like there was a lot of talk on the Arab world, which was kind of interesting, and no chapters on North or South America. I found kind of interesting, but I mean, he talks about them a lot. And in Prisoners of Geography, he touches on the US a real lot and how it's awesome strategically because we have access to two oceans. And that was kind of a theme again, like access to water, access to oil. But I liked the book. I was impressed with how much he had traveled around to some of these places. And I was kind of intrigued about Saudi Arabia. I thought that was the place that kind of stuck out to me when I was reading. I don't know if there was like a single location that stuck out to you guys on like places you might want to visit.
I don't necessarily know about places I would want to visit, but one of the chapters that stuck out to me was actually Ethiopia. And I guess sort of piggybacking off your statement, I would say where I do think this book is standalone. I feel like a lot of the area, a lot of the, I guess, places of the world that he doesn't talk about in this book, he does talk about in Prisoners of Geography.
Yeah.
So like you said, the United States, South America, and China. He all has chapters on Prisoners of Geography, as well as Russia, which are all sort of excluded in this book. So I guess maybe not like a sequel, but more as like a companion.
I would assume he's going back to what Jack said, because I myself said we're South America or Central America. Maybe his next book will concentrate on that, because except for Australia, weren't they sort of all near each other?
Yeah, so I think it was really his previous book touched on all those other places.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, it was definitely an emphasis on, I would say, the Muslim world in this.
So what stuck out to you on Ethiopia, Al?
I mean, for one, I guess it's just a lot of it is maybe a incorrect perception, but the cultural diversity within Ethiopia, I really thought was sort of shocking. I think they said they had, I don't have it written down, but there were like 6 or 8 main different cultural groups within the country. And then its strategic location with how they could use the Nile to kind of, while I don't think he was explicitly saying it, it sounded like if they wanted to, they could use the Nile to really bully the rest of the area, and how they could
really, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. Maybe we could put this up a little bit more, because I can't really hear it that well.
I think I'm a little congested and I'm not really speaking that loud. Can you hear me better, Sharon?
Okay, it's better now. Yeah. So what did you say that? Okay, now I don't remember what you said that I had a question about. Okay, go on.
So they had access to like the Nile. So like it sounded like they could cut the water of the Nile off to Egypt. So if they really wanted to take advantage of Egypt, they could. It sounded like they could almost hold them at ransom with building, because they were building some of these. They were looking to build some of these electric dams.
Mm-hmm.
I think they've been built already.
Right, but they could then use those to shut water off to the Nile, which would destroy the Egyptian economy.
Right. Yeah, he was kind of alluding to the possibility of a water war if
I don't think
that were to happen.
Yeah, he wasn't really alluding to it. I think he just blatantly said it.
Right. Right.
I mean, I also thought it was interesting when he talked about. I'm gonna butcher the group's name, but I believe it was the Amara. I don't know really how to pronounce it, but like the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia had never really been in political power. So it sounded like the country, for the most part, had always been governed by a minority group, which I thought was sort of interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
So those were the main things that really stuck out to me. And I guess there was this other part where there was a large contingent of Somalis living in Ethiopia that were more or less culturally more Somali, but there was like a massive part of the country that was technically part of Ethiopia, even though it was more or less like Somalians. Um, I don't know, like as I was reading it, I felt like a lot of time, like in the news, I've been hearing, or you hear about these issues with like cultural identities within America. And as I'm reading this, I'm kind of thinking like the cultural like strife that I feel like we in America are having seems very tame in comparison to what I'm reading about from some of these other countries in this book. Uh, was one of something that I really took away.
Didn't you, I sort of, as you're speaking, it seemed to me that was the theme of all of them, about how the different groups were competing against each other, and some would become in charge and then others, and they would make sure that no one else got into power, and then then it would switch or something like that. But it's always because the different people in different countries have different cultures, and they don't want to be ruled by other people, either the minority group or the majority group.
Yeah, absolutely, that's correct. Yeah, and I felt like yeah, you're right. That was a main takeaway. I felt like in many of the chapters, through many of the different countries and areas.
And I want to say, because before I tell you which one I really like, because I was looking at, I was a little surprised that he put Australia in there, because it didn't really fit with any of the other countries, although it was very interesting. I mean, I knew about the prisoners coming from England, but the rest of the history and the geography, I didn't know anything about, but I didn't know how that fit in there. Did you?
Australia.
I thought he was kind of just saying we're kind of at a crossroads in terms of, because Australia they trade a lot with China, but China's kind of at a point of irritating the US, and Australia kind of has to choose who they want to be friends with. And they also need to make sure, I think they said a lot of the oil comes from the Middle East around and up to Japan and Korea, where it gets refined and then comes back down. And I think they were getting this, I don't know if they were getting the sense or China had actually done this, but we're kind of stopping those trade routes. And that could be like something to watch going forward. Like Australia's kind of got to maybe choose who they're aligned with.
Yeah, that was sort of that was sort of the take that I got as well, that Australia more or less had to choose between us and China going forward.
But I hadn't really looked at a map of Australia, or like just how I mean,
how deserted it was, how unpopulated. Yeah. Yes,
it's unbelievable. Yeah, all the major cities are all on the coast, and there's like no population. And right. I mean, they said there's like no trees really, so there's no shade, so you can't. Kind of hard to move through there.
Well, I think that seemed to be a lot of the countries he mentioned, that there was a lot of land that was not being populated in a lot of these countries, a lot of these areas that he's talking about. And then there were areas that were very populated. So, and that also is a problem with their security and with their being able to work together and within their country.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like everything sort of about where like population density, I feel like everything really comes back to access to fresh water almost. Mm-hmm. And that, there are these massive like land continents that are totally isolated because they don't really have access to water. And I felt like that was, I mean, it's been so long since I read the first book, but my main takeaway with that was like trade routes and rivers. And I felt more or less the same. Like one of the big emphasis is on access to clean water to really grow land or grow food and like grow a population.
And so, going along with what Al just said, wasn't it interesting that even though the parts of Spain that were by the water, it wasn't as populated as the rest of Spain? It was like, because it was so mountains and everything. Is that what, am I getting that correct?
Yeah, I think, and I also found it interesting because they brought up Madrid being in the middle of the country, And I saw in Saudi Arabia, their capital was like more central. And I was like, why aren't their capitals like on the water? And then they were kind of describing how in those cases, they wanted to, it was a little easier to have control just in proximity to all the different cities. But yeah, it sounded like Spain was very mountainous. And
I mean, the history of all these different places it was so interesting. I just like how he told you from starting from whatever 1000 BC or something, and then all the different country, all the different tribes or groups that invaded all these different countries and how they survived and what made it happen, why it happened with some groups and why it didn't happen with other groups, and it was just really interesting. Well, I like history, so I was interested in that.
I mean, going back to Spain, had you guys heard of this Basque country and like how they wanted also independence?
Yeah, that I heard of, but I never knew about Catalonia, that they wanted their own independence.
So the Catalonian I knew because I feel like that's when we were there. That was when that was happening around when we were in Barcelona.
I think this is a constant thing. This has been going on for decades.
Right, but I mean, can you imagine that there are two separate countries or two separate like areas in Spain that want independence from Spain? Like how it has to cause a massive amount of internal stress.
But I think in the Basque case, so Basque I knew of because there's a soccer team called Atletico Bilbao, and they have to have a percentage of Basque players, which is like really weird. And like you think they wouldn't be able to be competitive, but they are. So there's like a ton of talent that come out of that region. But they basically say like, they pay their taxes, but they operate like, Basque region.
Yeah.
It sounded like they spoke a different language. Was I understanding that correctly?
Yeah.
Yes. Is that the same with Catalonia?
Yes, they have their own language too.
Is Barcelona in Catalonia? Is that
yes.
what that was sort of the impression?
Yep.
Right.
Oh.
So some say the only thing that's keeping Barcelona or Catalonia in Spain is the soccer teams, the rivalry of Madrid and Barcelona.
That makes sense.
And
yeah,
I was interested.
No, go on.
I was just going to say, if you look at compared to the African countries, though, a lot of those African countries were just, and you really appreciate it. I think a little more in the first book, but how he talks about how a lot of these people in Europe were just arbitrarily drawing borders. And you might have a country, I think like Mali, that has like 80 different languages. So they all probably feel like they want to be separate countries too, but they just don't know,
right?
I guess, how to.
Well, I vaguely remember in the first book, he made the claim that France and England purposely divvied up Africa through tribal lands to sort of cause strife. I don't know if do you remember that, Jack?
I don't know if it was intentional, but it seemed like they didn't know a whole lot about the cultures.
They didn't really care.
Yeah.
Their main purpose of going was to get the oil and the rock and the minerals and everything else and just be in control of the country and have free, cheap labor to get what they wanted. England, especially, and France too, with Algeria, they were not interested in the rights of the people who lived there. They just wanted to make money for their country.
Yeah, I mean, that's true of I would say most conquering countries, though. It's not a European only thing.
No, but that's the point of in Africa. Africa, it seemed it was split between France and England and I guess Portugal. Was Portugal?
Belgium. I think Belgium was heavily in there as well.
Too, right. Mm-hmm.
Sorry. What did you guys think of the Greece and Turkey chapters? Sort of pivoting a little bit.
Well, it was interesting that they have I never think of the Turks, although I had heard about that a couple weeks ago, but I never think of the Turks having a problem with the Greeks. And then when I read that about those little islands that they want, then that made me understand some things that some people had said a couple of weeks ago when I first became aware. I thought Turkey's main problems were with the Kurds and the problem they had with the Armenians. So I didn't realize that Greece was one of their problems.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole Trojan War, right? Wasn't that the Greeks versus the Turks? And then I believe Cyprus is half Greek, half Turkish.
Yeah.
I remember there was a girl in grad school who was from Cyprus, and I just remember her very very careful to explain to me that she was from, I think, the Greek side of the island.
And did
Found
she
it
have
kind of.
did she have feelings about the Turks on the other side of the island?
Yeah, she didn't like them.
Oh, okay.
I was just surprised. Like, I thought Cyprus was a little closer to Greece, and then when I actually looked at the map, it's way closer to Turkey. So I kind of wonder how. I don't quite remember how Greece got a say in Cyprus originally, but I was amazed that I didn't realize how many islands there were. And I think when we're in Europe over the summer, I kind of want to go to a Greek island. I was thinking
That should be
Crete.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
Crete, or I think there was Rhodos I was looking at. They look pretty
In
nice.
Spain also, they had a lot of
Mhm.
little islands. I didn't realize
Yeah.
there were little islands.
Well, I did a report in the 7th grade on the Canary Islands, so I knew about the Canary Islands a little bit.
I forget where they are. By Spain? Yeah, by Spain.
They're actually like, if you go just like straight west from Morocco, I think they're really closer to Morocco. It's kind
Okay.
of like our Hawaii, our version of Hawaii.
Okay.
Sharon, you
You
mentioned,
write down the products that they brew and who the government was, like that kind of a report. Like they used to ask you in 4th grade, tell them what farm products they grew, what was the government like, how many people were living there, that kind of an article, or a little more advanced.
Sharon, you mentioned the Turkey's problem with the Armenians. Was that like, did you know about that before reading this book?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
And they still have not, it was a genocide, and it was, the people who lived through it, my cousin's wife, her grandparents came here after the Armenian
genocide.
genocide, and Turkey will not admit to it at all.
Yeah, I recently heard that listening to just some YouTube clips. This guy I listened to on YouTube started talking about the Armenian genocide, but I like heard that like probably more or less like 3 weeks ago, and I had never heard of it, and it was relatively recent.
Right, and we had I think a couple years ago, I think our Congress they wanted to vote to talk about to talk about the Armenian genocide, but then then Turkey got mad and they didn't want us to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting.
And I was surprised, going back to Ethiopia, that they talked about all the different groups that were there, but they didn't mention the Ethiopian Jews.
That's true.
Did you know they had Ethiopian Jews?
I knew there's an Ethiopian Jewish section in Israel.
Right, where they came from after one of their wars or something. But they're not being accepted in Israel right now. But anyways.
The Ethiopian Jews aren't?
The Ethiopian Jews, especially by the Orthodox, they don't think that they practice the right kind of Judaism.
But Israel allows them into the country.
They think they did come there, but I think in the 80s or something.
But they're just not accepted as like Orthodox Jews.
Accepted now, but they're having a problem in Israel because a lot of Orthodox rabbis only say that you only can be a Jew if it's the kind of Jew they want you to be, like you practice the things they say and the way they say it, and even who you can marry and who you can't marry. But anyways, I read that they have a problem with the Ethiopian. They even have a problem with the Russian Jews, because a lot of them didn't practice it the way they wanted, and they married a lot out of the religion. But anyways, so I was surprised. I guess they weren't that important there. But anyways, I was surprised they didn't mention it, but that was me.
He did make a point. He did mention the Jews in Spain
Yes.
not being welcomed. I actually didn't know it was as bad as what he was describing, that they were pretty anti-Semitic.
Yeah, and they still are. That was another thing that surprised me. I didn't know that they still were so anti-Semitic.
Yeah, some of the, like, the drink, wasn't there like a drink like "Death to the Jews" or something?
Right, right.
That was
said that he said he was going to go. He told his next door neighbor he was going to go to Israel, and she said, "Be careful."
Jews.
Yeah, watch out for the Jews.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Oh, I mean, I find that less shocking than the name of the drink, but I mean, because you could find people like that wherever, right? You could find one person that would say something like that.
Don't forget that that's where the Spanish Inquisition started.
Right. Because it was essentially, if you weren't, was it a Christian or Catholic, you were going to be a Catholic. You were going, like, because Muslims were also executed as well, correct?
Right. So, anyways, so that was, I thought, so all that was real. So all the whole book was very interesting, very informative.
I think the only, let's see.
I mean, we didn't really touch on the United Kingdom. I sort of, in that
okay.
chapter,
Did you know? Did you know, like, when they said Scotland and England, like, were not the same landmass the whole time?
No.
Like, Scotland came from the north and England, like, collided into it. And that's why there's that, like, I guess, little ridge that separates them.
Have you been there? You've been there, haven't you?
I have, yeah.
But you saw the ridge?
I did not see the ridge. But I thought, I just assumed they all, like, grew up being there,
True.
like, together, but I guess not.
That's true.
I thought it was really interesting how he talked about the history of how really United Kingdom grew, and how he tied that into, like, England and Scotland forming a treaty almost, where, Scotland wouldn't attack England if they went and attacked France, type of deal. Thought that was kind of an interesting piece of.
When was that, Al?
I think it was the 1700s or 1600s. I don't exactly remember. But whenever the English Empire started to grow, he said it was most likely due to he attributed to the fact that they then didn't have to keep a standing land army to protect themselves against the Scots. Just something I would never think about. So I thought that was an interesting point.
And then why because they're right off the water, the ocean, then how they became such a large naval, how they became not naval, but they became such a big colonists, because they were able to get to all the different places, like to go to, because of the ocean, they could go to Africa, they could go to India. So they had a lot of ways to get to different countries where and so anyways, that's what happened.
Well, not only that, but they had a ton of, a lot of their ports were deep water, so they were easier to get out to the ocean. And then he even mentioned the types of trees that were indigenous were, I guess, like denser wood. So they were better, like, naval battleships, and they were more sturdy. So I guess better for ocean seafaring. I thought that was all just, I mean, interesting tidbits that sort of tied everything together, like, just interesting, like, little things, pieces of, history that kind of, make a big deal in the grand scheme of things, I would say.
It's interesting as I'm listening to you, that I didn't really realize. I mean, they used to be such a big empire, and then they started to lose all the different countries that were part of the empire, and now they seem so diminished.
Yeah, I mean, well, isn't that? I mean, that was, I feel like, the history of a lot of the countries in this, like, empire. I mean, even like Spain too, right? Like, Spain had a big come-ups when they sort of started colonizing Central and South America, and then England kind of took them over, and now I feel like we've kind of taken England over. And at one point, like the Greeks took over the Egyptians, and I feel like it's just kind of how it goes.
It's just like a money dump, right? Like, because once you have all these areas, you kind of have to enforce the trade routes. And then you only have so many people, and it's like hard to enforce, these trade routes over such distances. And I guess you can see, I mean, people are, complaining how much we spend on I guess defense out, and you can see kind of how it goes in cycles.
Mhm. Mhm. And then once you spend all that money to get people from your country there, then they have to control the people who live there originally. And then that costs a lot of money, and that costs a lot of anger. And so they all start rebelling.
Yeah. So do you think Scotland will part ways from the UK? Because I think that's kind of why he included this chapter, because that may be something because he was back to the Navy thing, because if they were to split, I think some of their good naval bases are really in the Scotland part, and they would basically have to part ways with that.
And sometimes the Scots say they want to be independent, and other times they take votes and they don't want to be independent. So I'm not sure which way it's going to go. Although I think he brought it up about Brexit, because Scotland wanted to stay in the EU, and England went out of it, of course. So that also might be a problem.
I thought Scotland just voted for independence and they voted to stay.
That's what I'm saying. But there have been other times maybe they never voted totally, but it's been closer. It hasn't been as far. I forget how the last vote went, but there have been times that they voted there, and it was a big majority of people, even though they were not the main majority. But we don't know. But now they're upset about, as I said, about Brexit. So I don't know how that's going to go, because they want to stay in the EU.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think recently they found a lot more oil off their coast, so I think they could almost be like energy independent.
Right.
So
the Scots or
okay. The Scots. Yeah, there's a lot going on over there. Because then they were also talking about like I guess the EU has to support Spain from not allowing Catalonia to separate, because if Catalonia were to separate, maybe they would do an alliance with like England, and then maybe China would get roped in. So then there would be like this system that's like competing against them.
Right.
Well,
and that they have found that there's a lot of minerals and gold and other kinds of other things besides gold. And they're just discovering it now. Where was that? Was that in Africa, or where was that?
I think that was in the Sahel.
Sahel.
That region.
The Sahel was in chapter 2, because just the different, as Alex said, because the main government split, England and France, they split up the countries depending on how they wanted to make the boundaries. And so many different tribes live there, and they all have their own interests. And that was so interesting. I didn't realize how close all those things that were going on there. That was really interesting.
I mean, one of the most interesting things I thought about that was just, I mean, when I think about, I would say when I think about travel, I don't usually think in terms of not being able to get somewhere. Like, if I really want to go somewhere, I feel like I can do it. But when he's talking about going over this region, like he was saying, he still felt like the likelihood of getting across it on a camel was probably higher than a car.
Yeah.
And that's like a wild thought to me. Of just, I mean, I think a lot of people in modern times think like just through technology we can kind of, overcome most obstacles, but I don't necessarily think that's always true.
Right. And and the fact is, it's still true, like you said, that you can't, it's so hard to get across these different, like the desert or the mountains or all the different lakes and whatever, right? It's just so hard. That's why people are so isolated.
Yeah, absolutely. That's not, I think isolated groups of people is not good for governance, I would say.
Hmm.
Which is how I think you get all these like separatist groups, right?
Well, because then, Alex, they don't forget, they don't want to include these people. They want to tell them what to do. They want to rule them, but they don't want to really include them in the government itself or the governing of the country or even of the part that they live in. That seems to me what all the problems are.
Yeah, I mean, to me, for like Catalonia, I think he made a good point. It seemed like Catalonia was paying like a sizable percentage of the taxes, and then they felt like the services they were getting from the central government did not come close to the amount that they were putting in.
Right.
So in their mind, if they're essentially separate already, like why are they paying to fund like Madrid or the other parts of Spain that they don't even care about?
Right. And then when Franco was there, he wouldn't even let them have, speak the Basques couldn't even speak their language. Yeah, and they couldn't, they're not in charge of their life, and they're not in charge of what they want their children to learn. So that's why that's why there's so many problems. And that's why in the Sahel, that's even a bigger problem, because there's so many different tribes, and where they came from is never really it's not really the way the colonialists made the boundaries, as we said. It has nothing to do with where they really were before all the colonialists came, before all the Europeans came. They could have been, it's like the Native Americans here. We decided where they're going to go, and it didn't matter where they were before we came. That's the same thing.
Right.
So this was a good pick.
So the last chapter, Sharon, it sounded like you did not read the space chapter.
Because honestly, I don't really care about space. So.
I thought the space chapter was pretty interesting, Jane.
You would, I know, because you're more scientific. I don't like things like that. But tell me about it.
Okay, well, Sharon, you will like this. So my favorite part about the whole space chapter was they were kind of discussing, well, there's no law that kind of regulates. So if China starts digging on one part of the moon, what's to stop the US from going on that same plot and digging? So basically, there's no law that governs like any sort of space right now, it seems. And this one kid, now I don't know if he was a kid. His name is, let's see, Dennis Hope, and he filed a declaration with the UN in 1980, and he started selling plots of land on the moon for $25 an acre. And
man, you weren't there, Jack.
That's hilarious.
And
with this, he sold more than 600 million acres on the moon.
Really? Well, how did people? Okay, well, tell me this. Did it say they plan on gaining ownership of what they bought?
All they got was a certificate.
A certificate. I think, Sharon, they own a plot on the moon, kind of like I own a plot in Scotland, and I'm technically a lord.
Wait, say that again. Wait, I can hear you. What'd you say?
They own a plot on the moon, kind of like I own a plot in Scotland, and I'm technically a lord. So
how much did you say it cost, Jack?
I think it was $25 an acre.
Oh, a good deal.
So he made like $150 million.
Nobody ever. He didn't get in trouble or anything.
There's no laws regulating it. Nobody owns it.
That's so ridiculous. Okay.
Maybe the brothers on Books should start selling
I wonder if
land
the
on
government,
Mars.
What if the government, wait a minute, what if the government, any government decides that they want to go on a piece of land he sold? What happens?
I guess that's a problem I guess no one has to face yet.
I guess not. Okay.
I think we might
Anything
have-
else interesting in there you want to tell me about? Tell the audience.
I mean, I would say the main emphasis on that chapter was about, I guess, the future importance of controlling space really for power. I would say that was the underlying message, where if you're controlling satellites and you're controlling space, it's going to be like the new like naval ships or like water ports of the world. If you're able to control the space, you can more or less control everything.
Did he say when he thought that would start becoming a problem?
He gave what I would say is a very optimistic outlook on when he felt like we'll start having moon bases. The last 10 pages I felt became like read almost like a science fiction book. It was like by 2050 we'll have like moon bases, blah blah blah, and by like I don't exactly remember the dates, but by like 2080 we'll be on Mars.
Oh, so soon. He's saying soon.
Yeah, and like we'll be mining meteorites. I mean, mining the ores out of meteorites, and throwing up like solar panels in space to reflect the sunlight and collected all of its energy.
Actually,
Okay, well, I
we
just
read
want to say, wait, I just want to say to both of you that by that time that happens, I will be in my grave. I want you to come over to talk to me and tell me if it happened. Okay, I will hear you.
I was just going to say, you talked about the like those big solar panels, and I think we read that also in Marin Katusa's book, where he's talking about shooting up like batteries into space, collecting energy, and then shooting it back down in like microwaves or something.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I
Really?
read that in science fiction books published in the 90s. I mean, you can write about it. It doesn't.
And so, how is that close now?
I think it's closer. I think it's closer than we.
I mean, yeah, it's closer than it was in the 90s. I don't think it's happening anytime soon.
I don't know. Elon Musk did get a shout out in terms of private companies now starting, and now Bezos is going to start trying to get into it, and they were talking of like I hadn't heard of this. I don't know if he was making this up or Elon's actually said this about like some like hotel up in space where millionaires can fly to, and then
well, it sounded like he was buying the International Space Station. He was going to create it into a hotel. I don't know.
A resort.
Is that true?
So
I don't know.
So within the chapter, did he talk about, like he did with the other chapters, the negatives and positives? Like the problems that we would encounter because it's space, like he did with the other countries, that they would have trouble keeping their country safe. Did he talk about that, or
he's definitely talking about people using weapons to send up into orbit and then shooting missiles from outer space. And apparently I think it sounded like Israel already had defense capabilities for like lasers out of space.
They do
to knock out other countries' satellites. It sounded like
they do. Are you saying Israel has it now?
He was making it sound like a handful of countries already had the ability to knock out other countries' satellites.
Is he just talking about the moon and Mars, or is he talking about more than that?
No, satellites.
Satellites, don't they go to it? Isn't he talking about landing on certain? He's not talking about people going to visit there, like you were just saying, but that had nothing to do with the chapter.
He was talking about that, but in regards to what Jack was saying, he was talking about the country's abilities to knock out competing countries' satellites from the air.
Okay.
Because he was saying more or less, all communication now is based on like satellites. So if you can knock out a country's satellites, you can more or less cripple them from both a economic and militaristic standpoint. Okay. So that would. So he was kind of saying, like, it sounded like if you attack someone's satellite, they may consider it a act of war almost. I don't know if I'm misrepresenting that, Jack. Is that more or less what you got?
Yeah. And he was also saying, like, basically at different levels above the atmosphere, like in the long run, who controls that? Like if a shuttle is blasting off and then needs to refuel, at some station, like, should they pay a tax to whoever owns like that
Oh.
part of the
Right.
place in the orbit? Kind of like, going around Gibraltar and needing to refuel as you go into the Mediterranean, but
Okay.
basically, because he also said, which is like mind boggling, but you need more fuel just to get out of the gravitational pull, as you would need to like get from there to Mars. So
Really?
like you need so
Yeah.
much fuel to get up. And
And then what
then
happens after you get up? Then you don't need as much to keep going around.
Yeah, because
you're out.
once you're out of gravity, you don't really have any force holding you back. You just kind of,
Oh, okay.
hit the thrusters and then you can float. I think it was the same energy required to get from Earth to the moon as from the moon to Mars,
So yeah.
which is like, I think the Earth to Mars is like a 9-month trip, and then obviously the Earth to moon you can probably do in like, I would guess like a day or so. I don't know.
The moon, it says, is 385,000 kilometers away. And that's
what is
like,
that miles?
and that's like, and that's like a short distance, I guess. Well, let's see. It would be like, 400,000 would be like 240,000 miles. So a little less than that.
Well, that's not so far, right? Because it's 3,000 miles just to California.
There you go.
So, anyways,
Yeah, so that was an unexpected chapter, I would say.
as I said, you picked a very good book. And I thought this was, I don't know if anybody else have anything to say? Do you want to add to our conversation?
I would just say this was an unusually long book for Jack to choose.
What it was? Oh, it was about 400 pages. That's right, wasn't it?
Yeah, that's an.
It was like 350.
That's an unusually long book for Jack to choose.
I try to keep it under 250.
All right, so because I did want to ask you something, but I didn't know what we want to talk about on the tape or not. So should we finish this and then?
Sure.
Ask away, Sharon.
Okay, we had discussed, I don't know how many times you want me to be on. I might be on too many times, but I'm getting the book about the Japanese subway problem.
The gas attack.
The gas attack. So I was wondering if you wanted to do that, or if you wanted, to wait a while and not have Sharon in your face all the time, or, so that's what I was curious about.
Well, this book is news to me, so I'm going to just let Jack answer.
You didn't know that?
Well,
I thought he knew.
Yeah. That was my book. That was my book pick.
Which one?
Hirakami book.
Oh,
Murakami. Yeah.
Okay.
But I think that one's in 3 books from now, because I think we're reading 2 of Al's picks.
Okay.
So yeah.
All right. Well, then I will read it now. And can I join you in 3 months?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I will read it because I will have it now, and I'll take notes and everything. And then when you're ready to do it, then I would love to do it with you both.
Awesome.
What are your 2 books coming up?
The books I picked were Mastery and I think it was the Thomas Sowell book. I'm blanking.
Something in discrimination.
Disparities maybe in discrimination. No, that's not right.
No, I think that is right.
So this book was your pick, Jack, and the underground one was your pick too?
Yeah.
Okay, I see. So Al, you 2 are doing your Alex's books for the next 2 months.
For the next 2 episodes.
Yeah.
The next 2. Okay. All right. And then when we're done, please send me again how to, when I'm never able to see them. So just tell me if, text me and tell me how I get to see them.
Okay. Well, you want to take us out?
Yeah. Please reach out to us at brothersonbooks@gmail.com for any book recommendations, or if you would like to be a guest host for a particular book you have in mind. A great review or rating on whichever platform you're listening to would be greatly appreciated. And lastly, if you can think of any friend, family member, coworker that might like this episode, please pass it along. I'm Alex Allweil. As with me as always is Jack Allweil and the godmother Sharon. Sharon, it's been a pleasure as always having you on for your third time. I guess it sounds like soon to be fourth.
Just like your, I'm sorry, but you sound just like your father, so okay.
I think Jack, I think it was a good pick. I enjoyed reading it.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Well, good night to everybody, and good night to you too. And it was wonderful seeing you. Hopefully I will see you sometime soon.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, bye-bye.
Yeah, Sharon.